Wayne Newton is the entertainer who transformed the Las Vegas residency into a multi-billion-dollar industry while simultaneously accumulating ruinous, 8-figure debt. A quarter-billion-dollar empire dissolved into a $5 million fire sale. This investigation tracks the precise mechanics of a financial collapse involving mob investigations, forensic auditing, and a relentless war with late-night television royalty. How does a career spanning 30,000 shows result in $20 million of debt? Was the Midnight Idol a victim of management failure or the target of a hidden predatory network? The blueprint for the modern Las Vegas residency was not drafted by a corporate committee. The model was forged by a 15-year-old high school dropout in the smoke-filled lounges of the Fremont Hotel. Born in 1942, Carson Wayne Newton was a child prodigy who escaped the damp air of Virginia for the dry heat of Arizona to soothe a crippling case of bronchial asthma. By age 6, the boy was a radio regular. By age 17, the teenager was a Las Vegas fixture. The economic math of the era was simple but brutal: 6 shows a night, 6 nights a week, for 5 consecutive years. This was a factory-like production of entertainment that would eventually total over 30,000 solo performances, a record that remains unsurpassed. Newton operated as a one-man orchestra. Despite never learning to read a single note of music, the performer mastered 13 different instruments by ear, ranging from the steel guitar to the fiddle and the banjo. This versatility made the act indispensable to hotel owners who needed a Swiss Army knife for their showrooms. The turning point arrived through tactical endorsements from the old guard. Jackie Gleason, known as the Great One, saw the performance of Danny Boy in Phoenix and immediately locked the brothers into a 12-appearance run on national television. Then came Bobby Darin, who handed over a song Darin had originally intended for a personal record, Dank Scone. The 1963 hit didn't just reach number 13 on the Hot 100, the song created a global brand. While the Beatles were still hunting for club gigs in Liverpool, Newton was already playing for presidents and headlining the Flamingo. The performer wasn't just a singer, the individual was the primary architect of a new economic model where the artist was the destination. The work ethic outpaced Elvis and outproduced Sinatra, positioning the man as the city's most reliable revenue stream. Yet, this high-frequency output created a massive accumulation of wealth that required a level of protection the performer was not prepared to manage. As the numbers on the paychecks reached 7 figures, the size of the target on the performer's back grew in equal proportion. The economics of Las Vegas shifted permanently on October 26, 1999, when Boyd Gaming finalized a document that fundamentally redefined celebrity worth. This was the Stardust contract, a 10-year, $250 million commitment that effectively turned a performer into a permanent piece of the hotel's infrastructure. At a time when the city was being consumed by the shadow of billion-dollar mega-resorts, the agging Stardust required a nuclear option to remain relevant. They found it in the headline-in-residence model, a strategy orchestrated by business partner Jack Wishner. This was not a simple booking. It was a total marriage of brand and building, where the theater was physically renamed for the artist, who was now legally obligated to perform 40 weeks a year. The paradox lies in the sheer scale of the math. The agreement generated a guaranteed income of $25 million annually, a figure that dwarfed every contemporary rival on the Strip. To put that in perspective, the next closest deal at the time was an $80 million contract for Danny Gans, meaning Newton was valued at more than triple the market rate for a top-tier headliner. It remains a watershed moment in the professionalization of the industry, designed to exploit a work ethic that had already produced over 25,000 solo shows in a single city. For the Stardust, it was a desperate play for visibility. For Newton, it was supposed to be the final reorganization of a chaotic financial life. Consequently, this contract became the blueprint for the modern Las Vegas economy. It proved that a single name could anchor a property more effectively than 1,000 slot machines. It is at this precise moment that we see the birth of the residency era we inhabit today, where global icons follow a path blazed by the Stardust deal. However, The tragedy of the ledger is that even $250 million cannot outrun a predatory past. As the first checks were cut, the performer was already navigating the wreckage of a previous decade. To understand why $250 million could not stop the bleeding, we have to look back at the moment he tried to stop being the employee and attempted to become the boss. The year 1980 marked a power vacuum in the Las Vegas hierarchy that would ultimately become the catalyst for a decade of ruin. The Aladdin Hotel and Casino was essentially a corporate carcass. Nevada gaming regulators had recently stripped the previous owners of their licenses following a federal investigation into organized crime influence. This was the precise moment Newton decided to move from the stage to the boardroom. Alongside business partner Ed Torres, the performer executed an $85 million acquisition of the property, a move designed to cement a legacy beyond the microphone. The paradox lies in the identity of the rival bidders. Wayne Newton wasn't just fighting the ghosts of the old mob, he was fighting Johnny Carson. The king of late night had partnered with gaming executive Ed Nigro in a competing bid for the Aladdin, viewing it as the ultimate expansion of his own NBC-backed empire. When the Nevada Gaming Commission approved Newton's bid over Carson's, the professional friendship that had seen the singer appear on The Tonight Show 30 times effectively died. Consequently, what began as a business rivalry transformed into a silent war between the most powerful man on television and the most successful man on the strip. It is at this precise moment that the entertainer became a target. By taking ownership of a facility with deep-rooted criminal associations, Newton invited a level of forensic auditing that few celebrities could survive. He was no longer just the midnight idol singing to retirees. He was now a high-stakes gambling operator responsible for $85 million in debt and the scrutiny of every federal agency in the desert. The boardroom was significantly more dangerous than the showroom, and the ink on the contract wasn't even dry before the first investigative microphones began to surface. The victory over Carson was complete, but the cost of the prize was astronomical, while the performer celebrated his new role as a hotelier. A specialized team of journalists at NBC was already digging into the source of the capital that funded the deal. On October 6, 1980, the NBC Nightly News aired a 3.5-minute segment that would effectively dismantle the public persona of the Midnight Idol. The feature, titled Wayne Newton and the Law, was a 210-second forensic strike led by investigative journalists Brian Ross and Ira Silverman. It is at this precise moment that the glamour of the strip collided with the reality of federal wiretaps and grand jury subpoenas. The broadcast alleged that Newton was not the sole architect of the Aladdin acquisition, but rather a high-profile front for the Gambino crime family. The paradox lies in the timing. Just as Newton was being vetted by Nevada regulators, NBC revealed a series of recorded associations with Guido, the Bull Penosi, a narcotics dealer with deep ties to the Lucchese and Gambino networks. According to the report, federal authorities knew of at least 11 phone calls between Penosi and Newton's residence in a single 2-month window. The investigation suggested that Newton had turned to Penosi to solve a problem, which Newton later admitted involved death threats against his young daughter, and that in exchange, the mob had secured a hidden interest in the Aladdin deal. Consequently, the broadcast framed Newton's testimony to the gaming board as a calculated deception. While Newton characterized Penosi as a mere fan, the FBI had been intercepting conversations where Frank Piccolo, Penosi's cousin and a Gambino capo, bragged about earning off Newton's ownership of the hotel. This was more than a PR nightmare. It was a legal trap. Hidden ownership in a casino is a felony in Nevada. Within hours, the man who had performed for presidents was being depicted as a puppet for East Coast racketeers. The resulting fallout was catastrophic. Newton described the reporting as Gestapo tactics, claiming the journalists had badgered him in the hallways of the commission. The clean-cut image was gone, replaced by images of a man in a bulletproof vest retreating into a hotel suite. But while the mob investigation was the external threat, a more personal betrayal was brewing behind the scenes at NBC. The broadcast had effectively signaled the start of a 10-year legal war, but the truly lethal strikes weren't coming from the newsroom. They were coming from the monologue of the most powerful man in Burbank. The corporate offices of NBC in Burbank are typically a sanctuary for high-level networking, yet in the early 1980s, they hosted an unscripted confrontation that would define the era. Wayne Newton had previously been a darling of late-night television, making approximately 30 guest appearances as a trusted colleague of the network. The paradox lies in how quickly a professional brotherhood can dissolve once $85 million is at stake. When Newton successfully outbid Johnny Carson for the Aladdin Hotel, the victory came with a hidden price, a war of attrition with the most powerful man in broadcasting. Consequently, Carson pivoted his nightly monologues into a tool for character deconstruction, utilizing a new brand of humor that targeted Newton's masculinity and stature. For nearly a year and a half, Newton attempted to reach Carson through intermediaries to stop the antagonistic jokes, but every request was ignored. It is at this precise moment that the entertainer decided to abandon the industry's standard protocol. Newton walked unannounced into Carson's Burbank office, ordered producer Fred de Cordova to leave, and delivered a blunt ultimatum. The jokes would end immediately, or he would kick his ass. While the overt jokes eventually ceased, the interpersonal damage was already permanent. Newton would later go on record calling Carson a mean-spirited human being who used his platform to hurt those who couldn't fight back. The investigative trail suggests the fallout extended far beyond late-night television ratings. Newton believed that the legal narratives regarding his alleged mob ties were specifically fueled by Carson's immense industry influence. While the public saw a smiling host, Carson's own attorney later described a private reality of black moods and professional vendettas. This conflict proved that even a king of the Las Vegas Strip could be rendered vulnerable by the right narrative at the right time. The cost of defending that reputation would soon be measured in more than just ego. As the legal fees and the weight of public perception mounted, the highest-paid act in the desert was about to realize that his fortune was disappearing as fast as a bad bet on the roulette wheel. By 1992, the economic engine of Mr. Las Vegas finally seized. Despite headlining for decades and commanding the city's highest paychecks, Wayne Newton filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, reporting more than $20 million in debt. The filing was a forensic map of a crumbling empire, featuring a $341,000 tax lien from the IRS and millions in liabilities stemming from the decade-long legal war with NBC. The paradox lies in how a man performing to packed houses of retirees every night could be functionally insolvent. It is at this precise moment that we see the failure of the sunk cost investment strategy. Newton was a performer who would routinely invest more capital into failing deals rather than withdrawing. He believed he could fix a bad property with just one more renovation or one more booking. Consequently, Newton was outpaced by the very city he helped build. The 1990s marked the arrival of the mega casino era, where billion-dollar resorts like the Mirage and the MGM Grand transformed the Strip into a global destination. Traditional properties like the Aladdin and the Flamingo became antiquated artifacts overnight, and Newton's middle-market audience was being squeezed by a more diverse, high-spending demographic. The financial decay was not just on paper, it was physical. In 2007, an executive jet was reportedly abandoned at Oakland International Airport because it was too expensive to repair. It sat rotting for 3 years before being disassembled and shipped to Newton's backyard. The hemorrhage of cash extended into his personal operations. By 2009, Newton was being sued for over $30,000 in unpaid bills for 4,000 bales of hay for his horses and hit with a $36,000 bill for a defaulted Cadillac lease. A second bankruptcy filing followed in 2009 after a mortgage default, and by 2010, his own pilot claimed $500,000 in back pay. It was a total breakdown of liquidity. The Midnight Idol was making millions, but the overhead of his lifestyle and the weight of his debts were consuming every dollar before it could reach the bank. While the performer fought to stay on the stage to pay his creditors, his greatest asset was about to become the center of a legal siege. to see the true scale of the collapse. We have to look behind the gilded gates of the 40-acre fortress he called home. The most visible symbol of Newton's peak eventually became the primary engine of his public humiliation. Casa de Shenandoah, a 39.5-acre estate at the corner of Picos and Sunset Roads, was designed to be a Mediterranean revival masterpiece, a sanctuary featuring artesian wells, a 14,000-square-foot main mansion, and a literal zoo of exotic animals ranging from wallabies to penguins. It was a property that cost $4 million to build in 1978, a staggering sum that signaled the absolute dominance of the Midnight Idol. But as the debt from the 1992 bankruptcy mounted, the estate transformed from a home into a distressed asset. The paradox lies in the attempt to monetize his own life. In 2010, Newton partnered with CSD LLC, selling the property for $19.5 million with the intention of opening a public museum. The plan was for Newton to live in a new residence on the back of the lot while tourists toured his primary home. It is at this precise moment that the old Vegas dispute turned toxic. Within 2 years, the partnership devolved into a series of bizarre lawsuits. Developer Steve Kennedy accused the Newtons of refusing to vacate the mansion and alleged that rabid Rhodesian ridgebacks were attacking workers on the grounds. The Newtons fired back with a countersuit, claiming Kennedy had entered their master bedroom without permission and threatened to shoot their dogs. Consequently, the project was poisoned before it could truly begin. While the museum did briefly open in 2015, it shuttered in 2018 under a cloud of fresh litigation and bankruptcy filings. The final valuation was a brutal reality check. In 2013, the property was marketed for $70 million, but by 2019, it was sold to an anonymous consortium for a mere $5.56 million. Newton was effectively locked out of his own life's work. Even the name, Casa de Shenandoah, had to be stripped from the gates because Newton retained the legal rights to the title. Yet even with the land gone, a separate battle emerged over the contents within the walls. This was a war for the physical history of Las Vegas, from Jack Benny's violin to the very note that defined the end of Elvis Presley. The Flamingo Las Vegas is the oldest operating resort on the Strip, and its current headliner is the oldest operating performer in the history of the city. Since January 2022, Wayne Newton has occupied Bugsy's Cabaret with a production titled Up Close and Personal. This is not a high-octane spectacle of the 1970s. It is a tactical retrospective designed to accommodate the biological realities of an 83-year-old artist. The residency, recently extended through December 31, 2025, functions as a living archive of the 30,000 solo shows that built the modern Las Vegas economy. Even as the physical monuments of his past, the Stardust and the Aladdin, have been demolished, the brand itself remains a permanent fixture of the neon landscape. The investigative trail shows a pivot toward an endurance-based business model. Newton, who once commanded a 3-octave range, now admits to a weathered vocal quality, leading to a restructured performance that emphasizes storytelling and instrumental mastery over vocal athletics. By incorporating 13 different instruments and personal anecdotes, the show minimizes the risk of cancellation and maximizes the old Vegas nostalgia that current tourists find increasingly rare. The 2026 schedule indicates no signs of deceleration. Dates are already locked for Las Vegas in early March, followed by a tour through Georgia and Florida. Tickets for these venues start at $60, proving there is still a high-volume market for the Midnight Idol even in his 9th decade. Consequently, the performer has achieved a level of institutional status where the profit is no longer in the hit records, but in the sheer survival of the persona. Having performed for 40 million people, he is the last connective tissue between the era of Howard Hughes and the age of the corporate mega-resort. The financial data is clear. The 165 albums and the record-breaking contracts have often been consumed by litigation and debt, yet the residency remains his primary mechanism for liquidity. It is at this precise moment that we see the artist as a reflection of the city itself, constantly rebranding, eternally in debt, but never willing to turn off the lights. What remains is the question of the total cost. This is the final audit of a man who outlasted his rivals, his fortune, and his own home. The investigation into the ledger of Wayne Newton reveals a fundamental truth about the mechanics of fame in a gambling town. The house always wins, but the survivor is the one who refuses to leave the table. Newton's trajectory is a case study in the extreme volatility of the entertainment industry. He built a $250 million residency model that every modern superstar now mimics, yet he spent a decade in a bulletproof vest fighting the fallout of an $85 million casino gamble. He outmaneuvered Johnny Carson only to find that the king of late night could use a microphone to do more damage than a grand jury. The paradox of Mr. Las Vegas lies in the contrast between his public opulence and his private defaults. We see a man who owned a private jet runway but faced a tax lien for $341,000. We see a performer who earned $25 million a year but lost a $70 million estate in a $5 million fire sale. This is not just a story of a singer, it is a forensic look at the industrialization of celebrity, where the artist becomes a high-yield asset that eventually outlives its own infrastructure. Ultimately, Wayne Newton remains the undisputed face of Las Vegas because he embodies its most core value, the refusal to fold. He has traded his health, his privacy, and his fortune to maintain a permanent spot on the marquee. As he prepares for his 2026 tour dates, we are left with a haunting realization about the price of professional immortality. If a man performs 30,000 shows and earns hundreds of millions of dollars only to end up back where he started, was the crown ever truly worth the wait? Or is the greatest gamble in Las Vegas simply believing that you can ever truly own your own name?